Thank you very much. I trust that you had a good week. We appreciate the opportunity to have been gone, and I'm not going to spend the sermon time telling you all about that opportunity, but I will tell you in the prelude together here that last Sunday at this time, John Grunwald and myself and a guy named Bobby Carson were with 3 Peruvian escort folks who were helping us out, and we were in a Peruvian prison. And I learned more about people in that Peruvian prison, and that was probably the most unique experience that I've had compared to the prisons here and such that we've gone in. And when we visited folks, that was different. We saw every form of corruption possible from the time we met the guards to the streets within the prison. The prison was built for 3,000 people, and there were 12,000 in there, plus visitors. It was visitors' day, and plus guards. It had its own little micro economy. There was everything you can imagine being sold. Every transaction. They had a bar. They had a restaurant. There were ways to swap money and take care of things. People selling cake. And in this Peruvian prison of 12,000 people, we actually saw 2 men walking around with bundt cakes and large serrated knives selling cake with that knife in the prison. There was so much going on, we decided, well, why should a man leave if all that's available? Haircutting and just everything by the prisoners. And it made me think of the microcosm that it really represented of the earth. And I knew that the sermon was going to be this way this week, but I didn't really have a good application for this particular sermon. I asked the Lord right then, would you help me bring this experience to that sermon? I wonder how many people wondered in that prison, how did I get here? You see, we're born into sin. We're born behind a gate. We're born in a corrupt world. Everything that you can imagine, everything corrupting, everything corruptible is here on this earth. These gentlemen behind bars had little hope for much else besides the church that we went to visit within that prison. On every block, every cell block was a congregation of prisoners who have accepted Christ while they were there. Even the pastors that we met were inmates. We went and we were able to preach and teach and share. Bobby Carson did the preaching. We all taught and shared and met. And the brotherhood that you felt among those who had found the light in the middle of darkness was overwhelming. The brotherhood of prisoners who realized who they were and didn't pretend they didn't need Jesus was overwhelming. We were able to learn from them more about being a church in that microcosm of sin and corruption than I ever thought. I thought we were going in to bless them. The truth of the matter is we left amazingly blessed, because like our world, in corruption and filth and sin and villainy, we are the light here in church. We're the only ones who understand, because God has lovingly poured out His Son for us. And we are to live a life that's a little different, and we're to meet in brotherhood, and we're to learn and grow together so that when people look at us, they understand who Jesus is. Just as we felt the brotherhood in the middle of filth, I can't describe, and I won't go into detail of all that we saw taking place or available within that prison. But in the middle of all of this corruption, and the prison was set down in a duned area, just sand dunes, and it looked like a moonscape where gates and fences had been placed. In the middle of the wilderness, a microeconomy, a microcosm of who we are. Today we're going to move into the book of Judges, and we're going to talk about Judges 16. And if you turn there with me, I'd appreciate it. We're going to have a time, hopefully, where we can share more about Peru. We've videoed some things and we've talked about some stuff. But God's Word needs to be proclaimed this morning on Sunday morning. We don't need to have a flashy presentation of who we are and what we did. But I will say, I got word this morning, yesterday, that some of the folks had seen pictures on Facebook that people had posted, and the comment was made, hey, it looks like they ate, and that's about all they did. Let me tell you, that's the only time we had Wi-Fi and could upload, and the only time we could relax and take pictures was between things. Typically, we ran an 8 a.m. to a 12 midnight schedule. But more of those photos are coming up. If you would check Facebook, check Tina's Facebook, my Facebook, others who went on the trip, you'll start to see more and more pictures of God's work in Peru. Today we're talking about Samson. Samson was a man who, like those gentlemen in prison, had to wonder, how did I get here? If you'll remember his story, he was a big man. He was a big bad boy. Samson had it all together. He was born, and God told his parents to set him aside for a purpose. God wanted him to be a Nazirite. He was not to touch an unclean thing, a dead animal or a dead person. He was supposed to follow in God's will. He was supposed to be an Israelite among Israelites and to live under the covenant and under the word. And he was to never cut his hair as a symbol of God's presence with him. A Nazirite was to be set aside, and Samson was never to cut his hair. We look at Samson's story in chapter 14 and 15. He goes through his life, and we get kind of a viewpoint of who he is. One day Samson looks up, and he's gone through his life knowing he was special and being told he was special, and he finds a Philistine woman who is forbidden, but she looks good to me, he says. And he talks to his parents, and his dad goes and speaks to the father of the Philistine woman, and he arranges the marriage, the forbidden marriage. But Samson, he's a big guy. He gets what he wants, and he's special. He's been told this all his life. You're set aside, and you're special. And so he finds a Philistine woman, and he makes arrangements to betroth her. And then he has a woman problem. He really can't help himself, it seems. He really likes this one that he's not supposed to like. So he goes and he meets with the father, and he meets with all the folks that he's supposed to meet with to marry this woman. And he decides he's going to throw a gamble out there. If you do this, I'll do that. And if you don't get my riddle right, you'll do this for me. And he's so proud of himself, and I'll come back to the lion and the honey. He's so proud of himself, he has a gambling problem. He's Samson. He's special. He's someone else. He doesn't have limits. He gets angry when he loses the bet. He pitches a baby fit, and he goes back home to daddy. So then he decides he's coming back to marry the woman. It's his wife. She's betrothed. And her father says, I've given her to someone else. We thought you hated her. You left. So Samson has a woman problem. He's got a gambling problem. And he's got an anger problem. He got mad enough to just leave. When he got embarrassed and upset about the gambling loss, he got mad and he left, and it's cost him his wife. So now he gets mad, worse and worse. And we see he goes and takes revenge, and he decides he's going to tear up their fields. And he does. He ties fire to the tails of animals, and they go through and they destroy the crops, and then they get more mad at him, and you see this escalation. So Samson's got a vengeance going on, and he's upset because he's Samson. He doesn't have to follow the rules. He gets what he wants. Then they came and they tie him up in chapter 15, verse 14, 15, 16. He got really mad, and he grabs a jawbone of a donkey, and he slew 1,000 men with his anger. Samson has a problem. If our lives are not committed to God and we don't fall underneath the authority of God's Scripture, we'll look more like the world than the Word. And Samson fell that way. Samson let his morals be driven by himself, by the world's standards. He wanted a woman, he went and got the woman. He got mad, he took revenge. He's told he's supposed to be special, and the Nazirite is never supposed to touch anything unclean. And we see the part in the previous chapter where he saw a lion, he killed the lion. Came back later, there's honey growing in the lion. It's a dead carcass, but he reaches in and grabs the honey. So even in creating his riddle, he's sinned, and he sinned, and he sinned. And like those guys in prison, I wonder, Samson, how did you get here? Because he chose not to follow what God had set him aside to be. He chose to set sail for his own purpose, his own selfishness, and his own desires. And he let the world dictate his morals, the world of me. I'm big. I'm a bully. I get what I want. Perhaps his parents contributed to this. He's special. Samson, you've been told all your life you're special. You know you get what you want. You're a big guy. But you know, they knew he was a Nazirite from birth. They knew he was set aside for a purpose. So maybe they enabled. Or perhaps he just got so big and boisterous that they couldn't resist this bully that had been raised in their home. Perhaps they said, well, look, just give him what he wants. You know, it's easier that way. He's a big old guy. He's always gotten what he wants. Where do we go wrong? I don't know, but just give him what he wants. Samson was not accustomed to answering to anybody. If his morality had been shaped by his purpose and his word, he wouldn't have been any of the places that he'd been. He would have said, I know who I am, and I'm supposed to be where I'm supposed to be. Chapter 16, after 20 years of ruling as a judge, we get to our text. It simply says this: Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute and went to bed with her. He's not learning. It says, when the Gazites heard that Samson was there, they surrounded the place and waited in ambush for him all that night at the city gate. While they were waiting quietly, they said, let us wait until dawn and then we'll kill him. But Samson laid in bed until midnight. When he got up, he took hold of the doors of the city along with the 2 gate posts and pulled them out, bar and all. He put them on his shoulders. He took them to the top of the mountain overlooking Hebron. Samson was a bad dude. The gate posts, the gates, he just doesn't get it. Samson got caught again. Same response, same reaction. So then we come to chapter 16, verse 4. It says, sometime later, he fell in love with a woman named Delilah who lived in the Sorek Valley. Now, we've all heard that old song, Romeo and Juliet, Samson and Delilah, and it's put as this love story according to the world's standards. This is not a good love story. This is a bad love story. Samson met this woman named Delilah. See, he has this woman problem, and he's got this betting problem, and he's got this anger problem, and all these things keep playing. But now, let me tell you, before you lose hope in Samson and we start looking at ourselves as well, somehow over in Hebrews 11, and we'll find out later, God included him in the roll call of faith. Samson may have lost his way, but God still loves him and redeems him. And when I look at my life and your life, and you look and examine your inner self, you know the things you struggle with, and I know the things that I struggle with, and I wonder, how can God love me, and what purpose does God have? Because inside we're ugly. All of our little secrets that we keep, and we understand the selfishness that we have. We say, God, how could you love me? How could you die for me? Samson's the same way. In Hebrews 11, it says he was a hero of the faith. But Delilah is about to lead him down a road that he didn't see coming. I imagine Samson saw that he could have made some changes, but he fell in love. You know that phrase, fall in love. I've never understood that. Love is a choice that we make to sacrifice our selfish desires on a daily basis. You that are married, you know how that can be. I didn't really want to make this breakfast or serve you or go pay this bill you asked me to do. I'd rather do what I want, but I love you. So because I love you, I'm choosing to pour my selfishness away and pour my love on you. That's love. Love is not something you fall into as if we're walking down Quintard and boom, there's love and we fall. Love is not that overwhelming emotional impulse. Now, I know that God uses things to attract us to one another, and then we date and all that silliness and all that seriousness at the same time, and that is love. But just to fall helplessly in love, that's the world's standard. The world teaches us that you can't help yourself. When Samson had previously married the Philistine, he liked her. She looks good. She's forbidden. So what? I like her. Here's Delilah. They fell in love. She says later, when she questions, do you love me? Verse 5, the Philistine leaders went on and said, persuade him to tell you where his great strength comes from, so we can overpower him, tie him up, and make him helpless. Each of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, please tell me, where does your great strength come from? How can someone tie you up and make you helpless? And Samson says, if you tie me with these fresh bowstrings that have never been dried, I will become weak like any other man. And we know that was a lie. That didn't work out for her. Then later on in verse 10, she says, you've mocked me and told me lies. Won't you please tell me how you can be tied up? He told her, if they tie me with new ropes that have never been used, I will become weak like any other man. And we know that was a lie. Verse 13, Delilah says to Samson, "You've mocked me all along and told me lies. Tell me, how can you be tied up?" And he says, "Well, if you weave the 7 braids on my head with the web of a loom." And so she fastened them and pinned them down, and she called again. That didn't work. That was a lie. So Delilah's frustrated. She's nagging him and badgering him and asking every which way, "How can I defeat you?" If that's not love, I don't know what is, correct? How can I defeat you? How can I do this? And she says, "How can you say I love you," she told him, "when your heart is not with me? This is the 3rd time you've mocked me and not told me what makes your strength so great." Now here's a lady who's being paid to sleep with him and find out secrets, and she's lecturing him about love. And he's too dumb to see through it. He's gotten closer. Each time she's chipped away a little bit, and he's getting closer. He's up to the hair, but he's not told her the truth. She has nagged and nagged and nagged, and he's almost ready to tell her the truth. But remember, he's forgotten who he is. This is someone set aside by God for a purpose. And all his life, he's ignored that purpose. He's fulfilled it technically, but not with his heart. He's been a judge. He's helped take care of the things that Israel needed when they needed answers, and helping in matters that needed to be taken care of. But his heart has always been right here on Samson, on himself. And now he's about to get to the point that says, "How did I get here? It's never caught me before. I've always gotten away. Yeah, that first wife, they killed her, but hey, that's okay. But now this new adulteress that we met, this prostitute, no problem. I got away with that. They really didn't hurt me. And now here's Delilah, and she's getting close to hurting him. Because she nagged him, chapter 16, verse 16, she nagged him day after day and pled with him until she wore him out. He told her the whole truth and said to her, "My hair has never been cut because I am a Nazarite to God from birth. If I'm shaved, my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." Samson didn't realize that that's a symbol of God's presence. Samson began having faith sometime way back, faith in his hair. He'd not walked in faith with God. He depended on himself, but he had faith on the hair being the key. Now, that's a symbol of God's presence, but to him, he became God's presence in his mind was the hair. Sometimes in our churches, someone says, are you a Christian? Well, I go to so-and-so church. If we don't recognize that as togetherness, and that's a symbol of being saved, it's a sign of us being saved that we gather together and work for the kingdom. But it's not our salvation. Church membership is not salvation. A relationship with Jesus Christ, and only a relationship with Jesus Christ, brings salvation. And then we bind together because we love one another. We want to take care of one another. We want to prop each other up in bad times and bolster one another on forward in good times. That's the sign of being a Christian, coming together as a church. If our relationship with God is set aside in our daily lives, and we just kind of rely on that church membership being what we are, we've lost the boat. We're off of our path. We're not doing what God told us to do. We're relying on some membership, some alliance, and we're calling that salvation. I don't know how many times there are two things I hear. Well, I'm a member of so-and-so. The other one is, well, I was baptized at age 3. That's not what I asked you. I asked you, are you saved? Do you have a relationship with Jesus Christ? Well, I used to go to this church. My mother was a preacher's wife, or, my dog had kittens. Whatever it takes to not say, I'm not sure. Because I'm a member of this thing that they tell me I'm saved, and they tell me, but in my heart I'm just not sure. But then there are Christians that, we know what we're supposed to be doing, and life has kind of gotten on us, and we've spent time struggling, and we've let it pile up to where it hurts, and we've let it grow to the point where we can't find God because we've walked away from God a little bit. Maybe like Samson, we've become self-sufficient, and then when the time comes, we don't know how to talk to a God that we think is so far away, when the truth is we walked away from Him. Now, Samson, remember, is still God's man. God's love is so overwhelmingly wonderful that all throughout this story, which is a negative story with a positive ending, we see in Hebrews, he's in the roll call of faith with Abraham and Moses and all those other guys. In our lives, we have to realize that no matter what happens, when we walk away from God, He still loves us. But if we get so far away from God that we've relied on other things that represent our salvation to be our salvation, we can't feel Him or hear Him when He calls. We may have truly accepted Jesus Christ as our Savior and Lord, and it was a miraculous experience. The biggest miracle in the world is God allowing me to come to heaven. But if I've walked away and gotten self-sufficient, I can't sense His presence anymore. I forget that it's not about membership or about activity. We can stay so busy at church that we spend time spinning our wheels. I wrote down and I asked Tina's advice, and I'm going to go totally against it. I humbly apologize. He was living on borrowed faith, the faith of his parents. They set him aside as a Nazirite. Sometimes our children in church have a drug problem. They've been drugged to church every time the doors are open. They're drugged to every activity we have. They're drugged to youth group. They're drugged here and there, and they never were laid at the feet of the cross and met Jesus Christ as their Savior and Lord. And then they quit going to church at a certain time, and they still want to come back and have a church wedding, and we love that, and that's great and wonderful, but the responsibility is ours because we love them. They're relying on that membership and maybe that activity as opposed to that relationship with Jesus Christ. And then that perpetuates in the next generation. They realize that we got to get our kids in church. And it starts all over again. Samson had that problem. He didn't cut his hair because he knew that was his strength and his mind, and he kind of enjoyed beating up on people. Samson enjoyed his power and his prestige. These guys were trying to figure out, what do I do with this guy? It goes on to say, when Delilah realized that he had told her the whole truth, she sent the message to the Philistine leaders, "Come one more time, for he has told me the whole truth." The Philistine leaders came to her and brought the money with them. Then she let him fall asleep on her lap and called the man to shave off the 7 braids on his head. In this way she rendered him helpless, and his strength left him. Then she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are here." When he awoke from his sleep, he said, "I will escape as I did before and shake myself free." But he did not know the Lord had left him. Samson had moved so far away from God that he did not know the presence of the Lord had been gone. Sometimes I believe we can be so busy and so borne down with things here on earth. We've walked so far away from God. When we have a real need, we don't even realize that we've not spent time in His presence. And where is He? Well, He's still here, but we're there. He's still available, but our proximity from Him has changed. And He may have been there all along to say, don't take that next step. Whatever this thing was that was going to be bad for you, He may be there as you're ready to take the step. And He was saying, don't do that. That's not good. That'll hurt your family, or that's bad for you. But we couldn't hear Him because we'd not been close to Him in so long. And we'd fooled ourselves. We didn't even know we weren't there. Samson says, how did I get here? I'm Big Samson. I don't understand. I've never been really caught in the act before. Imagine what's going through this man's mind as he realizes at that moment, my strength is left. He's let morals of the world shape his morals. He's relied on the symbolism of the hair as opposed to the relationship, the sacrifice of Christ, the love of who God is, and he's put his faith in his hair. And then it really gets tough. The Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he was forced to grind grain in the prison. This man who was set aside for the purpose of judging Israelites and representing God in those judicial things and taking care of what morally should happen had a purpose that he abandoned. He fulfilled the duty. He came to the meetings. He did the stuff, but his heart was gone. He let go every connection that he had to God, and he let himself take in everything that he wanted for his own life. Now he's had his eyes gouged out. He's killed people with the jawbone of a donkey, and now he's tied to the grindstone like the donkey. His purpose has changed from leader and God's representative to pack animal, strapped to a wheel, grinding the stone around to take care of milling for food for others. He's come from here to here, and he did it one little choice at a time, piece by piece. How many times in our lives do we recognize, boy, we didn't get in this financial shape overnight. We didn't get into this problem with our kids overnight. We didn't get into this moral issue overnight. It came piece by piece, choice by choice, decision by decision. And we find ourselves doing the same thing every week, back to the old grindstone, week after week after week, with no reward, with no pleasure, with no joy. We're just doing life because life is there, and that's what we do. We've gone so far from making God the priority in our life to making God a priority in our life, to making God a scheduled portion of time in our life, to making God, well, I go to church. Church is not where it's at. Relationship is where it's at. If you don't know Jesus and you hear all of this and you say, oh, I know that. I've seen Christians who you can't tell the world from the person. You know, he says he's a Christian, but he's no better than me. He lives next door to me, or he lives down the road from me, and he goes to church and he claims that makes him better. We apologize. Because our relationship with God is supposed to be evident in everything that we do. We apologize. Perhaps it was me. I apologize. We all have struggles, and we all have temptations, and we all have problems. But we're supposed to live so closely to God that when we fall and when we fail, we get back up, we dust ourselves off, we say, Daddy, I'm sorry, please give me strength not to do this again so that I can represent you to a lost world like a prison. We're all trapped together, and we're in the church on cell block D. Somebody needs to know there's salvation, there's hope, there's joy, there's peace, there's patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control through our actions, through our love of Christ. I don't want to be a donkey, to lose my purpose. I don't want people to look at me and say, well, that's what you get. You deserve that. I want to be able to be close enough to God so that He stops me from falling. I want Christian friends who are in church to be able to stop me from falling. I want to be able to help you as you're going along and I say, wait, what about this thought process? Would God want you to do that? And you not get mad at me, and vice versa. So that together we can represent the kingdom of God here in this fallen world. I want to be able to stay close enough to Him to hear the uttermost little voice of direction so that I know what I'm supposed to do and I'm able to follow Him. And I'll tell you right now, as all the rest may confess, I'm not good at being perfect. It's impossible. Only through the strength of God and staying close to Him can I stay anywhere near looking like Him. And then I'll still fail. But Samson's attitude was, I've got this handled. I don't need anybody. And it cost him. It cost him tremendously. Because finally, when you get to this low of a point, you feel abandoned and not anointed. He felt abandoned, strapped to a grindstone. But his hair started growing back. You know, little by little, his hair started growing back. He'd had some thinking time. Not much else to do. Where have I been? How'd I get here? Let's read together. But his hair began to grow back after it had been shaved. Now the Philistine leaders gathered together to offer a great sacrifice to their god Dagon. They rejoiced and said, "Our God has handed over our enemy Samson to us." When the people saw him, they praised their God and said, "Our God has handed over to us our enemy who destroyed our land and who multiplied our dead." When they were drunk, they said, "Bring Samson here to entertain us." So they brought Samson from the prison, and he entertained them. They had him stand between the two pillars. Samson said to the young man who was leading him by the hand, "Lead me where I can feel the pillars supporting the temple, so I can lean against them." The temple was full of men and women. All leaders of the Philistines were there, and there were about 3,000 men and women who were on the roof watching Samson entertain them. He called out to the Lord, "Lord God, please remember me. Strengthen me, God, just once more. With one act of vengeance, let me pay back the Philistines for my 2 eyes." And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars supporting the temple, and he leaned against them, one on his right and the other on his left. And Samson said, "Let me die with the Philistines." He pushed with all his might, and the temple fell on the leaders and all the people in it, and the dead he killed, his death, were more than those he killed in his life. Then his brothers and his father's family came down, carried him back, and buried him. See, God put Samson in that position, or allowed him to be in that position. Sometimes when we're only a little bit down, we don't need God in our minds. Sometimes we have to go way down before we actually stop and recognize, I need you, God. Please, God, help me out of this. And I sincerely want to serve you and follow you. And I want to stay close to you. Now, Samson is not the example I want to follow until the end. Samson is a negative example of a positive outcome. But Samson's such an accurate example of where a person can be today. We are so blessed and so affluent, sometimes we forget we need God. We're so busy and so burdened with things that we think we should handle out of embarrassment or pride that we forget God. Our family secrets stay in the family. We don't ask for help. We don't need God. We're going to be okay. And one day it gets to the point where only God will do the job. And we're flat on our back with nowhere else to go. And we look up and we say, God, help me one more time. Get me out of this situation, please. I want to serve you. And we're not bargaining with God, but pleading from the perspective of a prisoner with no way out. Pleading from the perspective of one who has no other hope and no other choice but Jesus Christ, and finally understands that. Pleading with a God who created us, saved us, will deliver us into heaven, and takes care of our every need, who wants us to have purpose, who wants us to stay in the middle of the road. And isn't it easier to get somewhere if we're going from point A to point B by staying in the middle of the road than by choosing our own route and getting lost and having to ask directions? And God, where am I? Because we've ventured so far away from you. God, I can't hear you. God, I'm so far left or so far right that I can't find the road anymore. Isn't it easier to get up in the morning and say, God, I know I'm a sinner. I agree with you that these things are sins. What do you want me to adjust so I can hear from you more accurately? Father, what do you want me to lay down in my life so I can lay this one down and that one down and this one down, and I can grow closer to you this week even? Father, even today. God, I don't want to be like Samson, who gets to the end of his life and realizes the potential he could have had. What could Samson have done had he not made these choices? He was a mighty man, but he spent so much time self-absorbed and making poor decisions, his potential was wasted till the end. I want to hear, well done, good and faithful servant. And I know he'll show me a million ways I could have done better. But perhaps it'll just be a million and not a billion if I try to stay close to him today and grow closer to him tomorrow. If my purpose is not to serve me, but my purpose is to serve Him so others can see Jesus in me. If our purpose as a church family is not to claim, hey, I'm a church member, but to say, we are the church, we are the bride of Christ, and we are to keep ourselves pure so that when others look upon us, they will see Jesus Christ. And you know what? We want to be pleasing to God so that when Christ comes again, He finds us, He takes us with Him, and we can say, we did our best, God, instead of, wow, I got in. In your life, in my life, every day we've got a choice. Today may be your choice to go, you know, that's how I want to be too. I want to represent God in the best way possible and represent self less and less. I want to be like Samson, who recovered from wherever I am now. He got up and moved on. I mean, honestly, from a human perspective, can you believe this guy got in the roll call of faith? Just from my little mind, when I'm reading names in there, Samson? He was a big old selfish guy. How did he get? That tells me if God can love this guy, oh, maybe He can love me. There is redemption. There is love. Jesus Christ loves me enough to save me from myself like He did Samson. So if you don't know Jesus Christ, today's your day. You don't have to make an official decision, but we can talk. If when we offer the invitation, you don't know Christ, come down. Let's spend some time together. As I told the earlier service, if you just want to make an appointment and let's do some discussing, I'll buy your coffee tomorrow. We can finish the conversation. It'll be just fine. It's that important. And if you're a Christian that wants to get back in the middle of the road today and do God's will, perhaps we need to come down and pray to God and learn how to lay down some baggage. I love God. I fail God. But He still loves me. You're in the same boat.